The courtroom fell silent as the judge's gavel struck, each echo reverberating through the sterile chamber like a death knell. 30 years. The words hung in the air, heavy and final, as Kim Jin-woo stood motionless in his tailored suit, his face an impenetrable mask. To the packed gallery, he looked every inch the cold-blooded criminal they'd read about in the papers, the ruthless boss of the Chilsung-pa, one of Seoul's most feared crime syndicates. But beneath that carefully constructed facade, something fundamental had just shattered. Jin-woo had built an empire from nothing. Starting as a street-level enforcer in the port city of Busan, he'd clawed his way to the top through a combination of strategic brilliance and calculated violence. By his early 30s, he controlled a vast network spanning entertainment, real estate, and underground gambling. His word was law in 6 districts. Politicians sought his favor. Rival organizations knew better than to challenge him. He'd become untouchable, or so he believed. The betrayal came from within, as it always does. His underboss, a man he'd trusted for 15 years, had been feeding information to prosecutors in exchange for immunity. The raid happened at dawn. 40 officers, search warrants for 12 properties, and enough evidence to bury Jin-woo for life. They found everything: ledgers detailing protection rackets, photographs of meetings with corrupt officials, and most damning of all, documents linking him to 3 unsolved murders from the previous decade. His lawyers fought hard. They challenged every piece of evidence, questioned every witness. But the case was airtight. The prosecutors had built an unassailable narrative of a criminal empire that had operated with impunity for too long. When the verdict came, it surprised no one. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing was merely a formality. Now, as guards led him from the courtroom in shackles, Jin-woo experienced something foreign to him: helplessness. The heavy steel cuffs bit into his wrists, each step echoing in the hallway as he was processed out of the life he'd known. No more silk shirts or Italian leather shoes. No more late-night strategy sessions in smoky back rooms. No more respect earned through fear. He was prisoner 2847, bound for Daejeon Correctional Facility, and the empire he'd built would crumble in his absence. The prison transport van smelled of sweat and disinfectant. Jin-woo sat in silence, staring out the reinforced window as Seoul's glittering skyline faded into the distance. Other inmates tried to gauge him, their eyes flicking toward the man whose reputation preceded him even here. In their world, a boss facing 30 years was either broken or dangerous. Jin-woo was neither. He was calculating, already thinking 3 moves ahead. Daejeon Correctional Facility loomed against the gray sky like a concrete fortress. Built in the mid-90s, it housed 1,200 inmates in a sprawling complex surrounded by 20-foot walls topped with razor wire. The intake process stripped away the last remnants of Jin-woo's former identity. They took his expensive watch, his gold signet ring, even his leather belt. In return, he received a pale blue uniform with his prisoner number stamped across the back. The prison operated on a strict hierarchy that mirrored the society beyond its walls. Correctional officers held absolute authority, but beneath them existed a complex social structure among the inmates themselves. Gang affiliations mattered. So did your crime, your connections, and your ability to navigate the invisible rules that govern daily life. Jin-woo understood power dynamics better than anyone. He'd been reading rooms and identifying leverage points since he was 16. His cellmate was a man named Park, serving 8 years for aggravated assault. Park had heard the rumors. Everyone had. The legendary Kim Jin-woo, boss of Chilsung-pa, now reduced to wearing the same cheap uniform and eating the same tasteless meals as common criminals. He watched Jin-woo carefully that first night, trying to determine if the stories were true. What he saw was a man who moved with quiet confidence, who claimed the lower bunk without asking, who radiated an authority that prison walls couldn't contain. The Korean correctional system had its own peculiar culture. Inmates were assigned work details based on behavior and skills. The kitchen was considered one of the better assignments. You worked with food, you got first pick of meals, and you operated in a space that felt almost human compared to the bare cells and concrete. Yards. It was also where Jin-woo first saw her. Keisha Washington had been working at Daejeon for 11 months when Jin-woo arrived. She was one of 4 civilian cooks employed by the prison, responsible for meal preparation alongside inmate workers. At 29, she'd already lived a lifetime. Raised in Chicago's South Side, she'd joined the Army at 18, served 2 tours as a logistics specialist, and mustered out with an honorable discharge and a culinary certificate from a military. Training program, Korea had been an accident, a friend's wedding in Seoul that coincided with a job posting at the prison. She'd applied on a whim and somehow ended up staying. Being Black in Korea presented its own challenges. The stares never quite stopped, the assumptions never quite faded. But Keisha had developed thick skin during her military service. She focused on her work, kept her head down, and saved money for culinary school back in the States. The prison kitchen was just a stepping stone, a way to build experience while navigating a foreign culture that often didn't quite know what to make of her. She first noticed Jin Woo during morning meal prep, 3 weeks after his arrival. He'd been assigned to kitchen duty, a placement that raised eyebrows among the staff. Men like Jin Woo didn't usually get such coveted positions so quickly. But the warden understood something fundamental. Keeping high-profile inmates occupied reduced trouble. Jin Woo's presence in the kitchen wasn't a reward, it was risk management. He moved differently than the other inmates. While they shuffled and slumped, Jin Woo carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to giving orders rather than taking them. He didn't speak unless spoken to, but when he did, his voice carried quiet authority. The other inmates deferred to him instinctively, creating space when he walked past, seeking his opinion on minor disputes. Keisha watched this dynamic with professional detachment. She'd seen plenty of tough guys during her army days, men who thought their swagger made them special. Jin Woo was different. His wasn't the bluster of insecurity, it was the settled confidence of someone who'd commanded real power and still retained the muscle memory of authority. Their first direct interaction came on a Tuesday morning. Keisha was prepping ingredients for lunch, a massive batch of kimchi jjigae for 400 inmates. One of the industrial-sized pots needed moving, and the inmate assigned to help her had been pulled for a disciplinary meeting. Jin Woo stepped forward without being asked, gripping the pot's handles with practiced ease. "Thank you," Keisha said, surprised. She'd expected him to wait for an order. Jin Woo nodded, his English basic but functional. Heavy things need 2 people. It was a small moment, forgettable in the grand scheme of a 30-year sentence, but something in that brief exchange caught Keisha's attention. Most inmates saw the civilian staff as either authority figures to manipulate or obstacles to navigate. Jin Woo looked at her like a human being worthy of courtesy. Over the following weeks, their interactions increased. Jin Woo proved surprisingly skilled in the kitchen. He had a natural sense of timing and organization, qualities that translated well from managing criminal operations to coordinating meal service for hundreds. Keisha found herself assigning him more complex tasks, not because the other inmates couldn't handle them, but because Jin Woo executed them with a precision that made her job easier. He also proved helpful in ways she hadn't anticipated. The kitchen's inmate workforce included representatives from various prison factions, men who brought their grudges and rivalries to work. Tensions could flare quickly in an environment where everyone had access to knives. Twice, Keisha witnessed Jin Woo diffuse situations with nothing more than a quiet word and a steady gaze. Fights that should have erupted simply didn't. "You've got them scared of you," she observed one afternoon after Jin Woo had separated 2 inmates heading toward a confrontation. "Not scared," Jin Woo replied, his English improving with practice. "Respect, different thing." Keisha raised an eyebrow. "Respect you earn, fear you take." "Yes." Jin Woo wiped down a cutting board, his movements methodical. "Fear is fast, but breaks easy. Respect takes time, but lasts." It was the kind of statement that revealed more than intended. This man had spent years building something based on respect, not just terror. Whatever empire he'd commanded outside these walls, it hadn't been held together solely by violence. There was strategy there, philosophy, even. As autumn turned to winter, Keisha found herself looking forward to Jin Woo's shifts. Their conversations remained brief and professional, but they began to develop a rhythm, an understanding. She learned that he'd grown up poor in Busan, that he'd never known his father, that his mother had worked 3 jobs to keep him fed. He learned that she'd joined the military to escape a neighborhood where too many of her friends hadn't made it to 30, that she loved cooking because it was one of the few ways to create something beautiful in a violent world. They were both outsiders in their own ways. Jin Woo, stripped of his power and facing decades in a cage. Keisha, a Black woman in a country where she'd always stand out. Working in a prison where she was neither inmate nor quite part of the correctional staff. This shared displacement created a strange kinship, an unspoken recognition of being trapped in circumstances beyond their control. The first crack in Jin Woo's carefully maintained armor appeared on a frigid December morning. News had reached him that his mother had passed away. Heart failure, sudden and merciless. He'd been denied permission to attend the funeral. Violent offenders serving major sentences didn't get compassionate leave. He received the news with characteristic stoicism, his face revealing nothing. But Keisha, who'd been watching him for months now, saw the way his hands trembled when he thought no one was looking. Saw how he gripped the edge of the industrial sink until his knuckles went white. She approached him during the lunch service lull when most of the other workers had been dismissed to the yard. "I heard about your mother," she said quietly. "I'm sorry." Jin Woo kept his eyes on the pot he was scrubbing. "Thank you." "You close to her?" "She was everything." His voice was barely audible. "Work very hard for me. Clean houses, sell kimchi and market, make sure I have food, have school uniform. I become this." He gestured at the prison around them. "To give her better life. Now she dies when I cannot even say goodbye." Keisha felt something shift in her chest. She'd assumed Jin Woo was just another gangster who'd gotten what he deserved. But the man in front of her was grieving his mother, tormented by the knowledge that his life choices had robbed her of her son's presence in her final years. "My dad died when I was deployed," Keisha found herself saying. "Heart attack. By the time they got me home, he'd been in the ground 2 weeks. I didn't get to say goodbye either." Jin Woo looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time in the conversation. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them. A recognition of shared pain, of regrets that couldn't be undone. "Does it get easier?" he asked. "No," Keisha admitted. "But you learn to carry it. The weight doesn't change, but you get stronger." They worked in silence for the rest of the shift, but the nature of their connection had fundamentally changed. They weren't just a cook and an inmate anymore. They were two people who'd lost something precious and were trying to figure out how to keep living anyway. Winter in Daejeon was brutal. The prison's heating system struggled to combat the penetrating cold, and inmates huddled in their cells, wrapped in thin blankets that provided little comfort. The kitchen became a refuge, warm from the industrial ovens, filled with the steam from boiling pots. One of the few spaces in the facility that didn't feel hostile to human life. Jin Woo found himself volunteering for extra kitchen shifts, ostensibly to keep busy, but truthfully to spend more time around Keisha. She'd become the one bright spot in the grinding monotony of incarceration. Their conversations deepened, moving beyond surface pleasantries to real exchanges. She told him about Chicago's South Side, about summer block parties and winter blizzards, about her grandmother's Sunday dinners that brought 3 generations together. He told her about Busan's markets, about the smell of grilled fish at dawn, about the hierarchy of respect that governed street life in Korea's second city. Cultural differences created occasional friction. Jin Woo struggled to understand America's particular brand of racism, the way it differed from Korea's more subtle but equally damaging prejudice against outsiders. Keisha had trouble grasping the Confucian principles that still governed Korean society, the obligations to family and elders that could supersede personal desires. But these differences also created bridges. Keisha introduced Jin Woo to the music she loved. Old school hip-hop, neo-soul, the sounds of Black America. She'd hum Lauryn Hill while prepping vegetables, and Jin Woo would listen, fascinated by rhythms and melodies completely foreign to anything he'd known. In return, he taught her Korean beyond the basic phrases she'd picked up, explaining the subtle gradations of respect embedded in the language, the way a single word could change meaning based on who was speaking to whom. The correctional officers noticed, of course. Fraternization between staff and inmates was grounds for immediate dismissal. But Keisha and Jin Woo were careful. They never spoke when other staff were present. They kept their interactions professional in appearance, even as the emotional connection deepened. The other inmates noticed too, but Jin Woo's status insulated them both. No one would risk his wrath by reporting them. 3 months after his mother's death, Jin Woo started planning his escape. It wasn't impulse. Jin Woo had never acted on impulse in his life. It was calculated necessity. News from the outside revealed that his organization was fracturing. The man who'd betrayed him had been found dead, killed in a hit that bore all the hallmarks of Chil Seong-pa's enforcement division. But the murder had triggered a power vacuum. 2 of Jin Woo's former lieutenants were now at war with each other, and the conflict was threatening to spiral into open street warfare. If Jinwoo remained in prison, everything he'd built would tear itself apart. Worse, innocent people would die. The businesses under his protection, the families who depended on the stability his organization provided. He'd spent 15 years constructing a system that, while criminal, maintained a certain order. Now that order was collapsing, and only he could restore it. But escape from a maximum security Korean prison wasn't simply about breaking free. It was about having somewhere to go, resources to access, a network to disappear into. Jinwoo still had loyalists on the outside, men who'd remained faithful despite his imprisonment. Through coded letters passed to carefully selected visitors, he'd maintained contact with his most trusted lieutenant, a man named Choi who'd been managing what remained of the organization. The plan took shape slowly. Choi would arrange everything: transportation, safe houses, forged documents. But Jinwoo needed an inside edge, something the prison wouldn't anticipate. That's where Keisha came in. He didn't want to involve her. The rational part of his mind recognized the danger, the impossibility of what he was asking. But over months of conversation, he'd come to trust her in a way he'd never trusted anyone except his mother. And more than trust, he'd come to care for her. Not the transactional care of a boss for a useful subordinate, but something deeper and more dangerous. One evening, after the kitchen had closed and the other workers had been dismissed, Jinwoo found Keisha alone, finishing inventory. He'd arranged the timing deliberately, had made sure they wouldn't be interrupted. "I need to tell you something," he said in Korean, his voice low. Keisha looked up from her clipboard, immediately sensing the shift in his tone. "What's wrong?" Jinwoo switched to English, though it was harder for him. This was too important to risk misunderstanding. "I am planning to escape." The words hung between them like a live grenade. Keisha's expression cycled through shock, disbelief, and finally, resignation. She'd known this was coming. Some part of her had been waiting for it since they'd first started really talking. "Jinwoo, that's insane. You know what they do to people who try to escape? They add years to your sentence. They put you in solitary for months. And that's if you survive the attempt? I know the risks." His face was calm, determined. "But my organization is destroying itself. Good people will die if I don't stop it. I have to try." What does this have to do with me? But even as Keisha asked, she knew. She was the inside advantage he needed. Jinwoo took a breath. "I need your help. Not to escape from here. I can do that with my people's assistance. But after I'm out, I need someone the authorities won't suspect. Someone who can help me disappear for the critical first weeks." "You're asking me to throw away my entire life." Keisha's voice was barely a whisper. "My job, my reputation, my freedom. You're asking me to become a fugitive." "I am asking you to come with me." The kitchen fell absolutely silent except for the hum of refrigeration units. Keisha stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "Come with you where?" "Away from here, out of Korea, eventually. I have resources hidden in places the prosecutors never found. Money, documents, properties in other countries. Enough to start over completely." Jinwoo stepped closer, close enough that she could see the intensity in his dark eyes. "Enough for both of us to start over." "This is crazy," Keisha said, but her voice lacked conviction. "We barely know each other. We're from completely different worlds. You're a criminal, Jinwoo. You've done things, terrible things." "I have," he acknowledged without flinching. "I cannot change my past, but I can promise you one thing. If you come with me, I will protect you with everything I have. You will never want for anything. And you will be free in a way you've never been free before." Keisha shook her head, trying to clear it. "Why me? Why are you doing this?" Jinwoo was quiet for a long moment. "In my life, I have known many people. Business partners, rivals, women who wanted my money or status. But in 38 years, I have never known someone who saw me, truly saw me, and did not fear me or try to use me. Until you." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was warm, calloused from weeks of kitchen work. "When I am with you, I am not Kim Jin-woo, boss of Chilseongpa. I am just Jinwoo. A man who makes you laugh when he cannot pronounce thoroughly. A man you taught to cook American-style pancakes because I said Korean ones were superior. A man whose mother would have liked you very much." Tears burned in Keisha's eyes. She'd spent months telling herself their connection was just circumstance, proximity. Two lonely people finding comfort in unlikely friendship. But she'd been lying to herself. Somewhere along the way, she'd fallen for this impossible man with his quiet intensity and hidden vulnerabilities. "I can't," she whispered. "Jinwoo, I can't. It's too much. The risk is too great." He nodded, not releasing her hand but not forcing her to stay either. "I understand. I had to ask, but I understand. I will not mention it again." But over the following weeks, Keisha found the possibility gnawing at her. What was her life here, really? A job that paid poorly and offered no advancement. An apartment in a country where she'd always be an outsider. Savings that would eventually run out, forcing her back to the States and a culinary program she'd complete alone, without family to celebrate with, without anyone who truly knew her. Jinwoo had offered her something terrifying and exhilarating, a life of adventure with a man who saw her completely and wanted her anyway. Yes, he was a criminal. Yes, his world was dangerous. But wasn't her current existence its own kind of prison? Trading safety for soul-crushing monotony, she began asking questions. Careful, hypothetical questions about his plan, about what life on the run would look like. Jinwoo answered them all honestly. He didn't sugarcoat the dangers or make promises he couldn't keep, but he painted a picture of possibility, of Southeast Asian beaches and European cities, of restaurants they'd open under new names, of a life lived on their own terms. The turning point came on a Tuesday night. Keisha was walking home from work when three drunk men cornered her in an alley. Their intentions were clear. She fought, training from the army kicking in, but there were three of them and only one of her. She managed to get one hand on her pepper spray when they suddenly backed off, hands raised, speaking rapid Korean she couldn't follow. A prison guard, off-duty but still recognizable, had appeared at the alley's entrance. He'd scared them off with nothing but his presence and uniform. The men scattered, and the guard helped Keisha to her feet, made sure she was okay, then continued on his way without expecting thanks. But the encounter shook her. She'd been in Korea for nearly a year and still couldn't speak the language fluently, still didn't understand the social dynamics that governed daily life. If something worse had happened, would anyone have come to her aid? Would anyone have even cared? The next day, she found Jinwoo during his shift. "Tell me the plan," she said quietly. "All of it. No hypotheticals. The real plan." Jinwoo's escape plan was elegant in its simplicity, which was precisely what made it dangerous. Complicated plans had multiple failure points. Simple plans succeeded or failed on the execution of a few critical actions. The foundation was already in place. Choi, his most trusted lieutenant, had been preparing for months. Money had been moved to untraceable accounts. Safe houses had been established in 3 countries. New identities had been created. Korean passports might raise questions, but Taiwanese documents would draw far less scrutiny. For Keisha, Choi had arranged American documentation that would withstand all but the most thorough investigation. The escape itself would happen during a medical transport. Jinwoo had been complaining of chest pains for weeks, symptoms subtle enough to seem real, but not severe enough to warrant immediate action. The prison medical staff, overwhelmed and understaffed, had scheduled him for cardiac testing at a hospital in Seoul, a 2-hour drive from Daejeon. Prison transports followed strict protocols. 2 guards, 1 driver, 1 in back with the prisoner. The van would be armored, but not military grade. Jinwoo would be shackled, but not to the vehicle itself, a safety measure in case of accidents. The route would follow main highways with regular traffic. The interception would happen at a predetermined highway rest stop, disguised as a traffic accident. Choi's team would stage a collision that would block the prison van while seeming completely innocent. In the confusion, a second team would approach from behind, overpower the guards with electrical stun weapons, and extract Jinwoo. The entire operation should take less than 90 seconds. Once free, Jinwoo would disappear into a network of safe houses Choi had prepared. He'd stay hidden for 6 weeks while the initial manhunt ran its course, then use the forged documents to leave the country. By the time authorities realized he'd slipped through their fingers, he'd be establishing himself in Vietnam, where Chil Seong-pa had business contacts, and where Korean fugitives could blend in more easily than in Western countries. That was the plan for Jinwoo. But adding Keisha complicated everything. She couldn't simply disappear the day of the escape. That would immediately mark her as an accomplice. Instead, she needed to maintain her normal routine for at least 2 weeks after Jinwoo vanished, establishing an alibi of normalcy. Then she'd request vacation time. Not unusual, she hadn't taken any days off in months. She'd tell her supervisor she was visiting friends in Busan, maybe taking a short trip to Jeju Island. Instead, she'd meet Jin-woo at the third safe house, apartment in Daegu, 90 kilometers from Daejeon. From there, they'd travel together to Incheon, where Choi would have private boat transport arranged to Qingdao, China. Once in Chinese waters, they'd be beyond Korean jurisdiction. From China, they'd fly to Vietnam using their forged documents. The plan required perfect timing, absolute discretion, and more luck than Jin-woo typically liked to rely on. But he'd spent 2 decades building an organization that valued competence and loyalty. If anyone could execute such a plan, it was Choi. Keisha listened to all of this with growing anxiety and strange excitement. What if something goes wrong? What if they catch you during the escape? Then I will be in solitary confinement for the rest of my sentence, and you will be safe because you know nothing about the plan. Jin-woo's voice was matter-of-fact. This is why you cannot help with the escape itself. You must maintain what Americans call plausible deniability. And if they catch me trying to leave, you will have a legitimate travel itinerary, hotel reservations in Busan, conversations with coworkers about your vacation plans. You are simply a prison employee taking a trip. Even if they suspect you, suspicion is not proof. It was sound reasoning, but Keisha knew the reality would be more complicated. She was an American working in a Korean prison when a high-profile inmate escaped. She'd been in regular contact with said inmate in the kitchen. Authorities would investigate her thoroughly. Her apartment would be searched. Her finances would be examined. Her phone records would be pulled. "I'll need to clean house," she said, thinking aloud. "Get rid of anything that connects us. The letters you sent to the kitchen about recipe modifications. I've been keeping them because they're actually helpful, but they show we communicated beyond just verbal instructions. My phone has photos from prison functions where you're visible in the background. Little things that by themselves mean nothing but together could form a pattern." Jin-woo nodded approvingly. "You think like an operator. This is good. You will need this skill in the life we are choosing." "If we're doing this," Keisha said firmly, "I need to know what I'm getting into. Your organization, what exactly do you control? What illegal activities?" Jin-woo didn't flinch from the question. "Protection services for small businesses, mostly. We ensure they can operate without harassment from other gangs. We take a percentage, but we provide real value. We also control several entertainment districts, clubs, restaurants, some that operate outside the law with prostitution and gambling. We facilitate certain imports that bypass customs. And yes, we handle debts that the legal system won't touch. Drugs? No, my organization has a strict policy against narcotics. They destroy communities, create addiction and desperation. I have seen what they do. We will not profit from that poison." It was a strange moral line for a criminal to draw, but Keisha found herself believing him. Jin-woo had spent months talking to her about philosophy, about the difference between power taken through fear and power earned through respect. A man who thought that deeply about ethics, even criminal ethics, wouldn't lie to her now. "The violence," she pressed. "How much blood is on your hands?" Jin-woo was quiet for a long moment. "More than I can wash away. I have ordered actions that resulted in deaths. 3 that I know of directly, others that happened as consequences of business wars. I cannot undo those choices. I can only promise that I do not kill casually, and I try to live by a code that limits harm to those who know the risks of our world." Keisha appreciated the honesty, even as it chilled her. This was who he was. Not a monster, not a saint, but a man who'd chosen a dark path and learned to live with the consequences. Could she accept that? Could she love someone capable of ordering death? But then she thought about her own capacity for violence, honed during military service. She'd been trained to kill, had fired weapons at human-shaped targets thousands of times. She'd never deployed to active combat, but she'd been prepared to take lives if ordered. How was that fundamentally different? Because the government sanctioned it? Because the chain of command made it legal? "I need time," she finally said. "Not to decide if I'm doing this. I think I already decided that when I asked you to explain the plan, but to prepare myself mentally for what this means. I'm going to become a criminal. I'm going to be wanted by law enforcement. I'm going to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder." "Yes," Jin-woo confirmed. "But you will also be free. Free from the small life this prison offers. Free from being an outsider in a country that will never fully accept you. Free to be with someone who sees you completely and wants you anyway. Keisha reached across the workspace between them and took his hand. Promise me something. Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens, you'll never lie to me about who you are or what you're doing. I can handle the truth, even if it's ugly. What I can't handle is deception. Jinwoo brought her hand to his lips, a gesture both tender and formal. I promise. No lies between us. Not now, not ever. Over the following 8 weeks, they finalized the details. Keisha began establishing her vacation alibi, mentioning to coworkers her plans to explore Korea's southeastern coast. She cleaned her apartment of anything suspicious, destroyed the letters, scrubbed her phone's photo library. She began transferring her savings to an account that would be accessible from overseas, small amounts at a time to avoid triggering any alerts. Jinwoo, meanwhile, prepared himself physically and mentally. He exercised rigorously in the prison yard, building the stamina he'd need for the escape and the weeks of movement that would follow. He studied maps of the transport route until he'd memorized every exit and landmark. He reviewed Choi's reports, refining the plan's timing and contingencies. But they also stole moments of genuine connection. Late shifts in the kitchen became opportunities for real conversation, for learning each other's histories and dreams. Jinwoo taught Keisha Korean dishes his mother used to make. Kimchi jjigae, samgyeopsal, the proper way to prepare kongnamul muchum. Keisha introduced him to her grandmother's recipes, the soul food that had sustained her through difficult times. They talked about the future in careful, hypothetical terms. What kind of restaurant they might open someday, once the heat died down and they could establish legitimate identities. Where they'd want to live? Keisha loved the ocean. Jinwoo preferred mountains. Whether they'd ever have children, and what kind of parents they'd want to be. These conversations were surreal, planning a life together while surrounded by prison walls and armed guards. But they also felt more real than anything Keisha had experienced in years. This man, this impossible, dangerous, fascinating man, had somehow become essential to her vision of the future. The night before Jinwoo's scheduled medical transport, they met one final time in the kitchen. It was late, past midnight, during a shift when Keisha was supposed to be alone. Jinwoo had arranged to be there through a complicated exchange of favors with other inmates. They had perhaps 20 minutes before someone would notice his absence. "Are you ready?" Keisha asked. "As ready as I can be." Jinwoo's face showed none of the tension she knew he must be feeling. "If this works, I will not see you for 2 weeks. Longer, if anything goes wrong." "Nothing will go wrong," Keisha said with more confidence than she felt. "Choi knows what he's doing, right?" "He does, but there are always variables we cannot control. I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If something happens to me, if I am killed or captured, you must forget this plan. Go back to your life. Do not try to help me. Do not try to contact Choi. Just walk away and be safe." Keisha shook her head stubbornly. "That's not going to happen." "Promise me," Jinwoo insisted. "I cannot do this if I am worried about you taking foolish risks. Your safety matters more to me than my freedom." She wanted to argue, to tell him that she wouldn't abandon him. But she saw the fear in his eyes. Not fear for himself, but fear for her. So she lied. "I promise." Jinwoo studied her face, clearly not entirely convinced, but he let it go. Instead, he pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that was both desperate and gentle. Keisha pressed her face against his shoulder, breathing in the smell of him, industrial soap and something uniquely Jinwoo beneath it. "When this is over," he whispered into her hair, "when we are free and far from here, I will take you to Busan. I will show you the fish markets at dawn, the mountains where my mother and I used to hike. I will introduce you to the few friends from my childhood who are still honest men. I will show you who I was before I became what I am." "I'd like that," Keisha whispered back. They stood like that for several minutes, holding each other, memorizing the feeling of safety and connection. Then Jinwoo pulled back, cupped her face in his hands, and kissed her. It was their first kiss, and possibly their last if things went wrong tomorrow. Keisha kissed him back with everything she had, pouring all her fear and hope and love into the contact. When they finally separated, both were breathing hard. 2 weeks, Jinwoo said. 14 days. Then we start our life together. 14 days, Keisha repeated. I'll be counting everyone. He left then, slipping back to his cell block through the service corridors he'd mapped over months. Keisha stood alone in the quiet kitchen, touching her lips where his had been, and prayed to a God she'd stopped believing in years ago. She prayed for Jinwoo's safety, for Choi's competence, for luck and timing and all the small things that would need to align for this mad plan to work. And she prayed for herself, for the strength to walk away from everything she'd known and build a life in the shadows with a man she loved and barely knew. The morning of the escape dawned cold and clear. Jinwoo was awakened at 0500 for the transport earlier than usual. Prison regulations required extra processing time for medical transports, additional searches, documentation review, briefing for the transport guards. He moved through the procedures with practiced calm, showing no sign of the controlled chaos about to unfold. The guards who would accompany him were Lee and Pak, both veterans with 15 and 12 years of service respectively. Jinwoo had studied them during his incarceration. Lee was conscientious but unimaginative, a man who followed procedures without deviation. Pak was younger, more alert, but also more prone to distraction. Neither was corrupt, which was actually preferable. Corrupt guards might notice things an escape attempt would want to avoid. The medical van was a reinforced transport model, white with small windows and secure compartments. Jinwoo was placed in the rear cage, his hands cuffed in front rather than behind, another safety measure in case the vehicle crashed. Lee sat across from him, service weapon holstered but accessible. Pak drove, following a route that would take them north on Highway 1 before cutting east toward Seoul. For the first hour, nobody spoke. Jinwoo stared out the small window, watching the countryside blur past. Korea in late spring was beautiful. Green rice paddies, mountains emerging from morning mist, small villages clinging to hillsides. He'd grown up in this landscape, had built an empire across it, and now he was seeing it possibly for the last time as a free man. Or he was about to reclaim that freedom in the most audacious way possible. The designated rest stop appeared at 0730, exactly on schedule. It was a modern facility with gas pumps, a convenience store, and parking for trucks and buses. Morning traffic was moderate, enough vehicles to provide cover, not so many that the area would be saturated with witnesses. Pak pulled the van into a parking space away from the main building. Need a bathroom break? Lee asked Jinwoo. Jinwoo shook his head. I'm fine. Lee radioed the main facility to confirm their location and estimated arrival time in Seoul. Standard procedure. Everything by the book. Jinwoo felt his heart rate increase slightly but kept his breathing steady. If Choi's team was in position, the next 90 seconds would change everything. It started with a delivery truck. The driver, one of Choi's men, appeared to have a medical emergency. The truck swerved, seemingly out of control, and crashed into a concrete barrier 20 meters from the prison van. The impact was loud, but not catastrophic, enough to draw attention without looking deliberate. Pak reacted immediately, calling it in while Lee moved to assist. Prison protocols for medical transport didn't cover traffic accidents, leaving the guards in a gray area of discretion. Lee's instinct to help overrode his training to secure the prisoner. It was a predictable human response, one Choi had counted on. As Lee opened the van's rear door to get a better view of the situation, 3 men approached from different angles. They wore the reflective vests of highway maintenance workers, completely unremarkable in a rest stop environment. 2 carried what appeared to be traffic cones. The third had something concealed under his vest. Lee realized the danger a half second too late. The first maintenance worker dropped his cones and pulled an electrical stun weapon, pressing it against Lee's exposed neck. The guard dropped, muscles spasming, unable to cry out or reach for his weapon. The second worker moved on Pak, who was still in the driver's seat. Another stun weapon, another guard incapacitated. The third man, Choi himself, Jinwoo realized, produced bolt cutters and moved swiftly to Jinwoo's position. The handcuffs were commercial grade, strong but not military. 3 quick cuts and Jinwoo's hands were free. Another 10 seconds and he was out of the van, being hustled toward a waiting sedan parked 3 spaces away. The entire operation took 73 seconds from start to finish. By the time other rest stop visitors realized something was wrong, the sedan was pulling back onto the highway, mixing with morning traffic. The guards were unconscious but alive, and Jinwoo was gone. Inside the sedan, Jinwoo fought the urge to look back. Choi drove with perfect attention to traffic laws. Not too fast, not too slow, using turn signals, maintaining proper following distance. Looking suspicious now would doom everything. Welcome back, boss. Choi said quietly, his eyes never leaving the road. Thought you might want these. He handed Jin-woo a plastic bag containing civilian clothes, a phone, and a wallet with cash and identification. Jin-woo changed quickly in the back seat, shedding the prison uniform he hoped never to wear again. The clothes felt strange after months of institutional wear, softer, better fitting, chosen by someone who remembered his size and style preferences. Any complications? Jin-woo asked. None. We've got 4 different cameras showing the accident from angles that support our narrative. The van's GPS will show you were stationary during the incident. The guards will report 3 maintenance workers but won't be able to describe them clearly through the stun trauma. It'll look professional but not traceable. Where to first? Safe House 7 in Suwon. You'll be there for 3 days while we monitor police response. Then we move you to Daegu. Daegu, where Keisha would meet him in 11 days. Jin-woo felt a flutter of anticipation mixed with anxiety. She was the variable in all this, the part of the plan that depended on factors beyond his control. He trusted her commitment, but could she execute her part without attracting suspicion? The safe house in Suwon was a 3rd-floor apartment in a building full of elderly residents. Choi had rented it 6 months earlier under a false name, paying cash and establishing a presence as a businessman who traveled frequently. The apartment was furnished simply: bed, table, chairs, small kitchen. A laptop with satellite internet, television tuned to news channels, everything Jin-woo would need for 3 days of isolation. I'll bring food daily at 1900, Choi explained. Different disguise each time. Don't answer the door for anyone else. Don't use the phone except for the encrypted messaging app. Don't even order delivery. Your face is about to be on every news channel in Korea. Jin-woo nodded. He'd expected this. The first 48 hours after an escape were critical. Police would establish roadblocks, monitor transportation hubs, activate informant networks. They'd focus their search on Jin-woo's known associates and properties. The safe houses Choi had prepared weren't connected to anyone in the organization's current or former roster, making them invisible to standard investigative procedures. After Choi left, Jin-woo turned on the television. Jin-woo's face appeared on screen, his official prison photograph, unsmiling and severe. The reporter described the escape in dramatic terms. Notorious gang leader, elaborate plot, armed accomplices. Police were characterizing it as a highly sophisticated operation, which it was. But they were also making assumptions that would send their investigation in predictable directions. They'd look for military-grade planning, professional mercenaries, international connections. They wouldn't think to look at a low-level American prison cook with no criminal record and no apparent connection to Korean organized crime. The days in Suwon passed with excruciating slowness. Jin-woo exercised to maintain focus, reviewed the next stages of the plan, monitored news coverage of the manhunt. His face was everywhere. A reward of 50 million won had been offered for information leading to his capture. Former associates were being questioned aggressively. 2 had been arrested on unrelated charges, pressure tactics to force cooperation, but none of them knew about the safe houses. None of them had met Choi, who'd been Jin-woo's silent partner for years, invisible to the rest of the organization. None of them knew about Keisha. On day 3, Choi arrived with the news Jin-woo had been waiting for. Police were scaling back the intensive manhunt. They believed he'd already left the Seoul area, possibly the country. Resources were being reallocated to longer-term surveillance and intelligence gathering. The immediate crisis phase was ending. Time to move to Daegu, Choi said. I've arranged transport in a delivery truck. You'll ride in a hidden compartment for 3 hours. Not comfortable, but untraceable. Jin-woo didn't complain. Discomfort was a small price for freedom. He climbed into the specially modified truck at 400 before dawn and settled into the cramped space behind false panels. The truck's legitimate cargo, office furniture, provided perfect cover. Even if police stopped the vehicle, they'd need serious probable cause to conduct the kind of search that would reveal Jin-woo's presence. The journey was dark, cramped, and physically punishing. Jin-woo couldn't stretch his legs or shift positions without risking noise that might alert someone outside. He focused on breathing exercises, on mentally reviewing the next phase of the plan, on visualizing Keisha's face when they reunited. When Choi finally let him out in Daegu, Jin-woo's muscles were cramped and protesting. But he was in a new city, far from the center of the manhunt, with 8 days until Keisha would arrive. The Daegu safe house was more comfortable. a small house in a residential neighborhood with a private yard and multiple exit routes. Choi had stocked it with clothes, food, and everything else Jinwoo would need. "She's doing well," Choi said as he prepared to leave. "My contact inside the prison says she's been questioned twice, but handled it perfectly. Gave consistent answers. Showed appropriate concern about your escape. Mentioned her upcoming vacation plans naturally. The investigators don't suspect her." Jinwoo felt relief wash through him. "She's stronger than they know." "She'd have to be, to take on what you're asking of her," Choi observed. "I hope she's worth the risk, boss." "She is," Jinwoo said with absolute certainty. "She's worth everything." Keisha's final shift at Daejeon Correctional Facility was surreal. She moved through the familiar routines, checking inventory, supervising meal preparation, managing the inmate workers, while knowing it was all a performance. Every interaction, every conversation, every moment was being played for an audience of one. The authorities who might be watching, looking for signs of complicity. The questioning had been intense, but manageable. A detective named Han had interviewed her 3 times, each session lasting several hours. He'd asked about her interactions with Jinwoo, about any unusual requests or conversations, about her knowledge of Korean organized crime. Keisha had stuck to her prepared narrative. Jinwoo was a quiet, helpful worker. Their interactions had been professional and minimal. She'd had no knowledge of escape plans and was shocked by the incident. Han had pressed hard on her upcoming vacation. Wasn't it suspicious that she'd requested time off right after the escape? Keisha had countered with documentation. She'd submitted the request 6 weeks earlier. Standard procedure. She'd been planning this trip for months, had hotel reservations, and a detailed itinerary. Her coworkers could confirm she'd been talking about it for weeks. The detective had examined her finances, looking for unusual transfers or large withdrawals. He'd found nothing because there was nothing to find. Keisha had been meticulous about keeping her escape preparations separate from her official life. The small amounts she'd transferred to her overseas account were explainable as savings, and she documented every transaction carefully. Her apartment had been searched twice. Officers had gone through everything: computer, phone, personal documents, even her recipe books. They'd found a life of boring normalcy. A woman who worked, came home, occasionally went out with coworkers, and spent weekends alone or exploring Korean tourist sites. No criminal connections, no suspicious associates, no evidence of conspiracy. By her last day, the investigation seemed to be losing momentum. Han had shifted his attention to Jinwoo's known associates, people with clear connections to Chil Seong-pa. Keisha was being classified as a peripheral contact, someone who'd interacted with the prisoner in a professional capacity but had no apparent role in the escape. Still, she maintained her cover until the very end. On her final afternoon, she said goodbye to colleagues with appropriate emotion. She'd miss them, she said. The job had been challenging but rewarding. Maybe she'd come back someday after traveling and figuring out her next move. The kitchen staff threw her a small goodbye party. Cake from the commissary, cards with well wishes, promises to stay in touch. Keisha smiled and thanked them and felt like the worst kind of fraud. These people had been kind to her, had accepted her despite cultural and language barriers, and she was repaying them with deception. But she was also choosing her own life, her own future, over the expectations of an institution that had never really valued her anyway. The prison had hired her because she was cheap labor, not because they cared about her skills or potential. Her colleagues were friendly, but had never invited her into their real social circles. She was leaving nothing that would genuinely miss her. The train to Daegu departed at 1800. Keisha boarded with a single suitcase and a backpack, traveling light as tourists do. She'd booked a hotel in Daegu's tourist district, a cover story in case anyone checked. She'd spend one night there, establishing her presence, then disappear into the part of the plan only she and Jinwoo knew about. The 2-hour train ride felt eternal. Keisha stared out the window at passing countryside, her mind churning with possibilities. What if the safe house address Jinwoo had given her was wrong? What if he'd been captured in the past week and couldn't contact her? What if this whole thing was an elaborate setup and police were waiting at the other end? But beneath the anxiety was a core of absolute certainty. Jinwoo had promised to be there, and he kept his promises. Their relationship might have been built in the strange, pressurized environment of a prison, but the connection was real. She knew him better than she'd known anyone, had seen him in moments of vulnerability and strength, had chosen him with open eyes and a clear mind. Daegu's train station was modern and bustling. Keisha collected her luggage and caught a taxi to her hotel. She checked in, went to her room, and forced herself to maintain the tourist facade for one more night. She ordered room service, watched Korean television she barely understood, and tried to sleep despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. The next morning, she checked out early. She told the front desk she'd decided to explore the countryside, might not be back for a few days, but wanted to keep the room. She paid in advance with cash. Then she caught another taxi to a shopping district on the opposite side of the city. There, she bought a cheap prepaid phone using cash, the kind you could pick up at any convenience store. She activated it, sent a single text message to the number Jin Woo had memorized for her. "I'm here." The response came 30 seconds later. An address in Daegu's western suburbs, followed by, "Take taxi, cash only, leave phone in trash before arriving." Keisha followed the instructions exactly. She found a busy coffee shop, ordered a drink she didn't want, and discreetly left the phone in the bathroom trash can. Then she walked 3 blocks to a different taxi stand and gave the driver the address Jin Woo had provided. The house was modest, tucked into a quiet residential street where nobody paid attention to visitors. Keisha paid the driver, waited until he'd turned the corner, then walked up to the front door. It opened before she could knock. Jin Woo stood there, dressed in civilian clothes she'd never seen him wear. His hair styled differently, looking like a completely different person from the prison inmate she'd known. But his eyes were the same, intense, intelligent, seeing her completely. "Hi," Keisha said, her voice shaky despite her determination to stay calm. "Hi," Jin Woo replied. Then, "Come inside. Quickly." The door closed behind her, and suddenly they were just standing in a small entryway, staring at each other. Two people who'd made an insane choice, who'd risked everything on a connection that might have been prison-induced delusion. Then Jin Woo smiled, a genuine expression of joy that Keisha had never seen in the institutional environment where they'd met. He stepped forward and pulled her into an embrace that felt like coming home. "You made it," he whispered into her hair. "Did you doubt me?" Keisha's voice was muffled against his shoulder. "Never. But until I saw you standing there, I couldn't quite believe we'd done it. That you were real and here and choosing this life with me." They held each other for a long time, processing the magnitude of what they'd accomplished. They were free, together, beyond the reach of the system that had kept them in their prescribed roles. Finally, they separated enough to really look at each other. Jin Woo cupped Keisha's face in his hands, studying her features like he was memorizing them. "Are you ready for what comes next?" he asked. Keisha thought about her old life, already fading like a dream. The prison job, the lonely apartment, the savings that would never quite be enough. Then she thought about the life stretching ahead. Uncertain, dangerous, but entirely theirs to create. "I've been ready since you first asked," she replied. Over the following week, they settled into the strange new rhythm of being fugitives together. Choi visited twice, bringing supplies and updates. The manhunt for Jin Woo was still active, but had shifted to monitoring known associates and international borders. Keisha had been cleared of suspicion. Investigators had concluded she had no connection to the escape beyond coincidental timing of her vacation. The house in Daegu became their temporary sanctuary. They cooked together, Jin Woo teaching Keisha more Korean recipes while she introduced him to Southern comfort food, adapted to Korean ingredients. They talked for hours, filling in the gaps of their stories that prison constraints had prevented. They made love with the fierce intensity of people who'd waited too long and weren't sure how much time they'd have. But they also planned. Choi had arranged their exit from Korea through a private boat from Busan to Qingdao. From there, they'd fly to Ho Chi Minh City using their forged documents. Jin Woo as a Taiwanese businessman named Chen Wei-ting, Keisha as an American travel writer named Lisa Morrison. The documents were excellent, Choi assured them. They'd withstand everything except forensic scrutiny. Vietnam appealed for multiple reasons. Korea's organized crime networks had limited reach there. The large expat community meant foreigners didn't automatically draw attention. Cost of living was low enough that Jin Woo's hidden resources would last for years. And Chil Song-pa had business relationships there, not direct control, but connections Jin Woo could leverage if necessary. "What will you do with your organization?" Keisha asked one evening as they sat on the small house's back porch, watching sunset paint the sky orange and purple. Jin Woo was quiet for a moment. "Let it go. The part of my life where I controlled such things is finished. Choi will manage what remains, distributing resources to loyal members, ensuring people who depended on us aren't abandoned. But I will not lead from exile. That path leads only to paranoia and eventual capture. You're really okay with that? Walking away from everything you built? I am walking towards something better. He took her hand, intertwining their fingers. Power like I had, it's empty. Impressive from outside, but hollow at the center. You fill the space that all that power never could. Keisha squeezed his hand. That's very romantic, but also a lot of pressure. What if I can't live up to this ideal you've built in your head? You already have, Jinwoo said simply. You chose freedom over safety. You chose me over the easier path. Everything from now is just the two of us figuring out how to build a life together. The departure from Korea happened on a Tuesday night. Choi drove them to a private dock in Busan's industrial waterfront, where a fishing boat waited with a captain who'd been paid enough to never remember his passengers. The crossing to China took 16 hours, most of it in rough seas that left Keisha nauseous and clinging to Jinwoo for stability. They landed in Qingdao at dawn, paying the captain an additional bonus for his discretion. A taxi took them to the airport, where they boarded a flight to Ho Chi Minh City using their false documents. Immigration officials barely glanced at their passports before waving them through. And just like that, they were gone. Kim Jinwoo, notorious gang boss, and Keisha Washington, prison cook, ceased to exist. In their place were Chen Wei-ting and Lisa Morrison, a couple starting a new life in Southeast Asia. Ho Chi Minh City assaulted the senses in the best possible way. Motorbike traffic flowed like water, thousands of riders weaving through streets with practiced ease. Street vendors sold pho and banh mi at all hours. French colonial architecture mixed with modern glass towers, creating a cityscape that felt simultaneously historic and urgent. The heat was oppressive but clean, nothing like the institutional staleness of the prison. Jinwoo and Keisha, Chen and Lisa now, they reminded themselves constantly, rented a modest apartment in District 7, an area popular with expats where foreigners attracted minimal attention. Their new home was nothing like the luxurious properties Jinwoo had owned in Korea, but it was theirs, chosen freely, unburdened by the weight of criminal enterprise. The first months were about establishing routines that felt normal. Chen worked as a consultant for a Taiwanese import-export company, a position Choi had arranged through business contacts, complete with references and employment history. The work was legitimate, if boring, moving electronics and textiles between Asian markets. Lisa enrolled in a cooking program at a culinary school catering to expatriates, finally pursuing the training she'd always wanted. They learned Vietnamese together, attending language classes twice a week. They explored the city methodically, learning which neighborhoods felt safe and which to avoid. They made casual friends, other expats, local business owners, people who asked few questions about their pasts. But the freedom came with costs they hadn't fully anticipated. Both were constantly vigilant, always aware that their entire life was built on a lie. Every stranger could be a threat. Every casual question about their background required careful navigation. They couldn't maintain deep friendships because real intimacy required honesty they couldn't afford. Keisha struggled with the isolation more than Jinwoo did. He'd spent years in an environment where trust was tactical rather than emotional. But she'd grown up in a tight-knit community where family and friends provided the scaffolding of identity. Now she had no family to call, no old friends to confide in. Just Jinwoo and the thin fiction they maintained for the outside world. They had fights, particularly in the first year. Keisha sometimes accused Jinwoo of being emotionally distant, of treating their relationship like another operation to manage rather than a genuine connection. He countered that his caution was protecting them both, that her American openness would get them caught if she wasn't careful. These arguments forced them to be brutally honest with each other in ways that ultimately strengthened their bond. They learned to communicate across cultural differences, to recognize when stress was talking rather than actual grievances, to support each other through the difficult process of building new identities. Money was less of an issue than Keisha had feared. Jinwoo had hidden approximately $3.2 million across various accounts and assets, amounts small enough to avoid international banking scrutiny, but large enough to sustain them comfortably. They lived modestly by choice. Large expenses drew attention, but never worried about rent or food or unexpected costs. After 2 years, they made a bold move. They opened a restaurant. It was Keisha's idea, a way to transform their love of cooking into something productive. They found a small storefront in District 2, away from the main tourist areas but accessible to the growing expatriate community. Jinwoo handled the business side while Keisha designed the menu, a fusion of Korean and Southern American cuisine that reflected their merged identities. They called it The Crossing, a name with layers of meaning only they fully understood. The restaurant became their legitimate front and their genuine passion. Keisha created dishes that told their story: kimchi and collard greens, bibimbap with cornbread, bulgogi po' boys. The food was strange and wonderful, and it attracted an adventurous clientele who appreciated the unexpected combinations. Jinwoo proved surprisingly adept at managing front-of-house operations. His ability to read people and manage conflicts translated well to handling difficult customers and training staff. He was firm but fair, earning loyalty through competence rather than fear. It was the first legitimate business he'd ever run, and he found unexpected satisfaction in building something that didn't require looking over his shoulder. The restaurant's success brought its own dangers. They became minor local celebrities, featured in food blogs and expatriate magazines. Their faces appeared in photographs, their story, or rather the fiction of their story, was repeated in reviews and articles. Every piece of publicity increased the risk that someone from their past might recognize them. But as years passed, the fear gradually lessened. Jinwoo's organization in Korea had collapsed without him, fragmenting into smaller groups that lacked his strategic vision. The manhunt had long since gone cold. Authorities had declared him likely deceased, probably killed by rivals or hiding in a country with no extradition treaty. Keisha had been completely forgotten, just another prison employee who'd moved on to other things. They began to relax into their new lives. They traveled occasionally, always carefully but with increasing confidence. They visited Cambodia and Thailand and Laos. They talked about someday going to America, about Keisha showing Jinwoo her Chicago, though they both knew that remained too dangerous. 5 years after the escape, on the anniversary of their reunion in Daegu, Jinwoo proposed. They were at a beach in Nha Trang, watching sunset paint the South China Sea in shades of rose and gold. The ring was simple. They couldn't afford anything too extravagant without raising questions. But Keisha cried anyway. "We're already married in every way that matters," Jinwoo said. "But I want it to be official. I want you to have the ceremony, the commitment in front of witnesses. I want the world to know you are mine and I am yours." They married quietly, in a small ceremony attended by the restaurant staff and a few close friends who knew them as Chen and Lisa. A Vietnamese lawyer officiated, creating documents that certified their union under their assumed names. It wasn't legally binding in any country that knew their real identities, but it felt real to them. The wedding night, they talked about what they'd sacrificed and what they'd gained. Keisha's family thought she'd died or disappeared. She'd had no contact with them since leaving Korea. Jinwoo had attended his mother's funeral only through photographs Choi had secretly sent him. They'd given up their pasts, their names, their connections to everyone they'd known before. But they'd also gained something profound, the freedom to define themselves on their own terms. They were no longer the criminal and the prison cook, the boss and the employee, the Korean and the American. They were simply two people who'd chosen each other against impossible odds and built a life that belonged to no one but themselves. As they lay together that night, Keisha traced the scar on Jinwoo's shoulder, a reminder of his old life. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Everything you gave up?" Jinwoo thought carefully before answering. "I regret the harm I caused, the people I hurt in the name of power and respect. But I do not regret the path that led me to you. And I do not regret choosing freedom with you over power without you." "That's a good answer," Keisha said, kissing the scar. "It's the truth," Jinwoo replied. "The only truth that matters." 7 years after the escape, they finally felt secure enough to do something they'd been discussing for years. They contacted Choi and asked him to deliver messages to their families. Carefully worded letters that revealed nothing about their location but confirmed they were alive, safe, and happy. Jinwoo's message went to an elderly cousin who'd known him before his criminal life. Keisha's went to her younger brother, the one person she trusted to keep her secret. The responses came months later, forwarded through a chain of contacts designed to prevent tracing. Both families were angry, confused, and relieved. But they understood, in their own ways, that their loved ones had found something worth disappearing for. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The restaurant thrived, They trained staff who could eventually take over day-to-day operations. They began thinking about opening a second location, maybe in Cambodia or Thailand. They talked about adoption. Children were possible, though complicated by their false identities. They grew older together, gray hairs appearing, small aches and pains accumulating. But they also grew deeper together, the kind of partnership that comes from surviving impossible situations and choosing each other every day. On particularly difficult days, when the weight of their deception felt crushing, they reminded each other of the promise Jin-woo had made in the prison kitchen. "If you come with me, I will protect you with everything I have. You will never want for anything, and you will be free in a way you've never been free before." He'd kept that promise. They were free. Not free from consequences or complications, but free from the small lives they'd been living. Free to love each other openly. Free to build something meaningful. Free to define their own terms of existence. And that freedom, hard-won and carefully maintained, was worth every sacrifice they'd made. The story of Kim Jin-woo and Keisha Washington, or Chen Wei-ting and Lisa Morrison, as the world knows them, is a testament to the transformative power of human connection. In a maximum security prison designed to break spirits and enforce conformity, two people from radically different worlds found each other. A Korean mafia boss and an American military veteran turned prison cook shouldn't have had anything in common. But beneath the surface differences, they shared something fundamental. A hunger for authenticity in a world that demanded masks. Their escape wasn't just physical, it was an escape from the identities that had been imposed on them. Criminal and victim, powerful and powerless, insider and outsider. Together, they created something new. A partnership built on radical honesty, mutual respect, and the courage to risk everything for a chance at genuine freedom. This isn't a story that glorifies crime or suggests that love conquers all obstacles. Jin-woo's past actions caused real harm to real people, consequences he can never fully escape regardless of how far he runs. Keisha sacrificed her family, her country, and her legal identity for a man she barely knew. The price they paid for their freedom was enormous. But it's also a story about the human capacity for reinvention, about how love can emerge in the most unlikely circumstances, about how two people can choose each other against all reason and build a life that defies every expectation. Somewhere in Southeast Asia, in a small restaurant that serves improbable fusion cuisine, two people live under assumed names and carefully constructed lies. But the love between them is the most honest thing either has ever known. And in a world that often forces us into predetermined roles, that honesty is its own kind of rebellion. If you enjoyed this story from True Mafia Tales, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories of love, loyalty, and life on the edge of the law. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode and let us know in the comments. Would you risk everything for love? Share your thoughts below and don't forget to check out our other videos exploring the hidden world of organized crime and the real people caught in its web. Until next time, stay safe out there.